Good afternoon. My name is Kathy Gill. Today, we acknowledge the First Nations people of this land. For me, here, it is the Bidjigal and Gadigal people. We pay our respects to elders past, present and future. We also acknowledge the continuous and ongoing custodianship of this land and that sovereignty has never been ceded. Today, our speakers come from many nations across Australia. We wish to thank our speakers for giving their time to speak out about the impacts of the intervention Stronger Futures laws as they enter their last year of implementation. Today is an opportunity to listen and to learn how we can stand in solidarity with First Nations to demand just laws and the full restoration of human rights. We welcome everyone who's listening online. We are recording this event and we do hope to have it online for those not able to attend. If you wish, you may send comments or questions via the chat line. This forum has been organised by Stop the Intervention Collective Sydney, the Intervention Rollback Action Group in Parkway, Alice Springs, and Concerned Australians. Our three organisations have been speaking out against the injustices of the intervention for many years, and we look forward to its conclusion in June 2022. What we must remain vigilant for is that those draconian measures never see the light of day again. What occurs in 2022 must be a new relationship with First Nations peoples of the Northern Territory. A relationship which will truly acknowledge First Peoples' sovereignty and self-determination. We thank all speakers, and I will now hand over to Professor Larissa Berendt, OA, who has very kindly agreed to be our moderator today. Larissa has worked extensively in Indigenous education and research, the law, and visual and performing arts. Larissa is an acclaimed writer, filmmaker, and broadcaster. Thank you all, and now over to you, Larissa.
You're muted, Larissa.
Can you believe that after all this time? Let me start that again. Thank you, Arnie, Kathy. It's really great to be here. I'm on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I'd just like to once again pay my respects to them as we talk about these very important issues. We can acknowledge the generosity with which traditional owners share their land with us across the many lands that we're on today. So if you can take a moment to do that acknowledgement in your own way at this point in time. We've got a fantastic last panel today with Arnie June Mills, Emeritus Professor John Altman, Adjunct Professor Eva Cox and Kendall Trudgeon all joining us. I just want to also just give a special shout out to those of you who've been with us all day through all three panels, but this one promises to be every bit as good as the others and seems like a great note for us to finish the reflections of the day on. So it's now my really great pleasure to introduce Auntie June Mills, who's joining us from the Northern Territory, one of our Larrakia traditional owners, a very well-known Darwin identity. She's known as, of course, a singer-songwriter, but as well as that, a really strong, powerful voice on Indigenous rights, of which she's been a really strong advocate. Many of you will know she recorded her debut album in 2005, I'll Be the One, and was awarded Female Musician of the Year at the Indigenous Music Awards. She's also, of course, as if that wasn't enough, a very accomplished visual artist known for her beautiful paintings and limited edition prints and her public art projects. Like many of our talented and wise elders, she works tirelessly with young people to inspire them, sharing her creativity and her culture. So it's now my great pleasure to hand over to you, Arnie June. It's so lovely to see you and to have you join us.
Thank
you, darling. I also like to acknowledge the landowners from that area and thank them for allowing me to speak on country, well, and across all the other countries, of course. And I suppose acknowledge our ancestors, the ones that have gone before us, and all the coming up leaders now all around the country. I'd like to acknowledge all of them as well. And here I speak up on Larakia country, but I also can represent, pretty much a lot of the top end area, because of the work we do within communities and protests and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. So am I going to speak now about the intervention?
Oh, yes, if you would, it'd be lovely. It's such
Yeah.
a lovely introduction, but yes, we would love to hear what your reflections are about that.
Oh, thank you, darling. Well, the reflections are, all this time on, horrifically, like it's never going to end. I'm yet to see the end of 2022. I can't believe them at this stage. They're on a great innings. It's not about what they said it was about, and it's going to continue because they're benefiting immensely from the intervention. Despite the suffering of our people, the injustice to our people, the human rights abuses to our people, but these fellows that are doing the intervention are gaining considerably in all sorts of manners. So we've had enough. We've had enough of being abused. We've had enough of the injustice, the bullying, the controls that are right across the communities. It's something that people in this country don't have to put up with, but we have to put up with it, and we have no say in it. And there's no end to it. It's disgusting, and we've had a gutful. We're tired, darling. We want something good to happen, and all we get is more of the same. This disgusting behaviour and controlling methods. And what else can I say? We've had enough. We've had enough, and it's time for the government to listen to us. Get some, the old saying, nothing about us without us. So why don't we have people up there talking with government, and further than that, government listening and actioning. If you're really serious about improvements and something happening, if you, prove what you're going on about, which was the whole reason for the intervention in the first place. However, we all know now in hindsight that it was all based on a lie. And it continued on. The minute it should have been the fact that when we found out that it was a lie, then it should have been pulled out then, or what do you call it, disbanded. And oh gee, that was a bit wrong, let's just backtrack a bit. But no, they keep going with their bloody mindedness. And but yeah, you're not serious about good things for our community unless you've got our people on board, and if you're listening. And they like to go on and on and on about accountability and transparency and all those things. Well, put your money where your mouth is. Well, actually, it's not even their money. The money that they used was our money, the IBA money, and probably defense money. So they're robbing us and abusing us in the same process, eh? Disgusting behavior. Absolutely. And people should know this. So the IBA money is really coming from royalties, which is mining on their land. Now, most Aboriginal people are saying no to mining because of the damage to the environment and all sorts of things. But occasionally, our people will agree to mining if they think there's going to be benefits to the community. And of course, royalties, which then they can probably do things themselves. However, that's not the case. It's stockpiled, very difficult to get at. and now, as we see, being spent for wrong purpose to further their gains or their needs or their whatever, their little games, and abuse us. And it's been said for many, many, many years, we are the industry, and it rings true, and it stays true, because there's no fallback from that position of use and abuse of the First Nations people, the people of this land, the land which we own. It's our land. They are illegally occupying our land, raping and pillaging both the land and the environment and the people. And it's got to stop. Australia's got to wake up. I know it's very hard to know exactly what the position is in this country when we're not taught. It's not in the learning centres, it's not in the schools, it's not, people are behind the 8 ball and knowing the truth about this country. But we have to, through our processes, broaden that knowledge through more in the schools, more in the communities, right across the board. People have got to know the real true history. I know we've been saying it for that long, but we've got to keep on saying it, and we've got to keep on doing it, because as much as the people from Australia, there's new people arriving in Australia every day as we speak, are equally clueless. And this is really important, because we're such a minority within this country, and we can't do it all. And I believe in people power to turn things around, no matter what issue we're talking about. And we need everybody out there. We need the people to action things and to get up, jump up and down and scream and get the government in a headlock, right? Or an arm lock, or whatever it is, what we need to do. And what if that doesn't work? Well, something else will work. But we can't give up, and we have to bring that message home. And on both sides of the fence, on the government side and also on the people side, the people of Australia, we've got to somehow up the ante in getting our messages out about the actual political scenes that we have to live with on a day-to-day basis. It's really there. It's almost like, well, they are a law unto themselves, and there's no stopping them. But we have to find the ways to stop them. Yeah, we can't wait for them to. Oh yeah, we'll stop next year, or we'll stop the year after. Or we've got to force the issue. Am I talking too long or too short?
No, Gina, it's been fabulous. I just wonder, and obviously hearing you speak, we're always reminded of the strength and resilience and power of our First Nations women. And obviously one of the things that the intervention claimed to do was to protect women and children. And I wonder if you can give us your reflections as a First Nations leader, a traditional owner, a very strong woman, somebody who cares about and works with young people. What do you think are the things that are needed to really ensure that First Nations women and children are looked after and protected?
Yeah, well, again, it's a lie. Our women are powerful, we are powerful, and we do have a say. And you say, oh, they need to be protected. From whom, I'd say. And I would say, if I wanted protection out there, I wanted to be protected from the police. I want to be protected from the white authoritarians that are making ridiculous choices on our country and imposing them on our people. Yeah, like I say, they say, oh, we need to be protected. From whom? Well, it's from your policies and your bureaucrats and your draconian ideas. Darling, as we speak, I'm evicted from my house that I've been in for 10 years. Guess what? I wasn't served. I wasn't aware that they took me to court. Then they got a engaged sheriffs. Again, I wasn't informed by any relevant people. You know how I found out all my information? I found my information from the court registry who sent me the notice of the court orders. I didn't find out from housing. I didn't find out from all that stuff. Now, this is, I'm only mentioning this, apart from the fact I'm evicted as of the thing, is that they do what they like. They do what they like, and it's very hard to recover from the original point. Once they put things into action, it's very hard to fight your way out of that, no matter what we're talking about. And everything is geared towards their idealism or whatever they think that they want. Everything in the system is geared their way. It's very difficult for First Nations peoples, especially well, everywhere, the language barrier and everything like that. I would say that if I wanted protection, protect the women and the children, it'd be from these government systems, the police, the over policing. Over policing is ridiculous in the territory, as is everywhere. You come here, over policing is a problem. Okay, the black deaths in custody, all those recommendations that our people worked so hard to get, not one has been implemented. They don't do cultural cultural protocol training or cultural awareness training. They still haven't incorporated anything. You know, I wanted to see after Don Dale, but even before Don Dale, actually, I wanted to see walk into that jailhouse rock and see on the wall, phone an elder. Why can't we have a poster there saying, talk to an elder? Why not? Our poor babies in these institutions, you know, if nothing else, can't they just have an elder at the end of the line to just talk to? No, nothing. It's just systematic uh, abuse, systematic torture. So yeah, you know, they say when you say we need protection, well, the way that it was geared for the intervention was that we needed protected from our men or from our own community or other things going on in the community. Well, no, I would say that the protection I need is from the bureaucrats and the police and the systems that govern this dominant culture. Um, if I wanted protection for anything, it's from them, the illegal occupants of our sacred lands.
Powerfully put, Auntie. Just one final question. Obviously, as a singer-songwriter, you're a storyteller, and we come from a strong storytelling tradition. One of the things that's spoken about at the moment is the importance of truth-telling, and people are also talking about a treaty. From your perspective, what do you think is important about both of those things? And do you think that they can achieve a better outcome than the one we've got now?
The which outcome, darling?
Oh, I'm saying if we have if there is a treaty process and people start listening to truth-telling, listening to history and understanding Aboriginal history better, do you think some of these policies might be changed? Is that a way to get people to think differently?
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. I will just say straight up that I'm not a treaty person. I don't trust the treaty system, and every treaty that I know has never been honoured. So, but I'm all for the truth telling, the speaking about, the honesty. Like I said before, people have got to know the stories about this country, the real stories. So I'm all for that. And people have got to acknowledge, see, this country is still in denial. It's in absolute denial about the truth of, and it's in the language. I would like to see more talking about the language that's used. You know, they say, oh, settle. Well, no, brutally invaded. You know, massacres. It was not nice, pretty picture. And all them people that are sitting comfortably in their homes that have inherited incredibly by the brutality that's been perpetrated against our people in 233 years, sitting back in their homes on their little blocks and feeling comfortable, and denying the fact that our people were slaughtered for their comfort, absolutely slaughtered and abused for their comfort. And they've got to know that, because that's part of the, the reality. I'm getting turfed out of a 3-bedroom house, public housing, and be that whatever, but it doesn't measure up against the massacres that are taking place, and the subsequent generations after that benefiting and being very secure, and then Indigenous people right across the country are not secure even in public housing. It's very not right. So yeah, I think talking, storytelling, bring it on, and we will find a way. For me, it's not treaty. However, because I still say, I'll say, I'm not going to come to your table and do deals with you and beg to be a part of your constitution and your corrupt systems. No, I'm going to enforce the fact that this is my land, my people's land. We never ceded. You are illegally occupying, and you need to back your truck up, right? And I will exert my law, and I tell you what, my laws is far better than any law that's been incorporated on this country since they invaded. For instance, young fellows that were executed and killed in, I think, Bali a couple of years ago, them young fellows. Well, my law, I'm just using this as an example, darling, but that law over there was okay, keep them in jail for 10 years and then line them up in execute them with a firing squad. Well, just for an example, that's not my law. You're not my law to be saying, hey, you young fellas, okay, you're a bit young and silly and you've been mucking up and you better go home now, and you're not allowed to come back to my country till you learn how to behave. That's my law. Now, isn't that far better and superior and more humane than that law? And these are the things I'm talking about, and the more people know about it, and actually our law is the law of this land, not this imposed law that's come with the invading colonies. The law of this land is my law. When you come to Larrakia, and even though as much as you want to deny me till the day, kingdom comes, it's still Larrakia land, Larrakia law. And my law says, in that particular instance, them young fellas shouldn't have been executed. That's not right. My law would have said, okay, you fellas, you go home and you learn how to be good boys and then you come back. That kind of capers. And I could go on and on. And I like to talk about our laws, because you know what? Our laws govern environment. Our laws govern human relationships, living together. And our laws have been there far, far, far longer than these imposed laws, which are changing all the time, all the policies and the things. Our laws are good. We are the masters of survival. We've proven that. Generation after generation after generation. And when this whole world goes to absolute utter shit, we'll still survive because we've got the survival skills. And I tell you what, people are better wake up and learn and listen, because, hey, this world is going to shit. It is going to shit big time. And I will say it again, we are the masters of survival. And we are not exclusive people. We are inclusive people. When you meet me and my family, we give you a skin and we take you in, and we are inclusive. And we teach people how to live safely on our country, and we look after you. I say it's not about ownership, it's about responsibility. When you come to my country, I won't be bossing you around because just to be a boss. It's about protection and looking after, and my responsibility as an elder to do my duty. I think I might be time up, darling.
Well, I tell you what, you've got a rousing, you can't hear much when you're on the on the Zoom, but if you look at the pictures, there's a lot of clapping and a lot of rousing. And I think you've really stirred people up in the best possible way. Auntie June, thank you so much for your wisdom, your insights, and also while you're going through such a traumatic thing in your own life, to take the time to talk to us about these big issues is really humbling. And we're very, very lucky to have you and your voice and your advocacy. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, darling. That's really lovely. And lovely to see you. I haven't seen you for quite a few years, darling.
I'm still here.
I know.
It's lovely to see you too. You look so lovely.
And everybody else there. Yeah. Oh, and from Dan too.
Thank you. Well, what a hard act to follow, but I'm sure Professor John Altman, Emeritus, is up for it. Also such a strong advocate from day one, from the intervention. Obviously came from a place of working closely with communities across the Northern Territory with a great policy mind, knew right from the start that this was going to be a bad idea. Professor Altman is Emeritus Professor at ANU, and he is an adjunct professor at the Jumbunna Institute at UTS. He has been, as I've mentioned, a really vocal critic against the Northern Territory intervention since it was announced when he was still at ANU. One of the books that he co-authored right at the beginning, co-edited, I should say, with Melinda Hinkson, Coercive Reconciliation, Stable, Normalised, Exit Aboriginal Australia, was actually the first book that pulled together a critique from a First Nations perspective. And since then, he has continually researched, published about the intervention, being one of the, not just the most active of activists, but also really helping with the detailed research he's doing into very critical issues. So it's great to see you, John. So I'll hand over to you. Maybe you can start by telling us whose country you're on, and then I'll let you give us your insights, if you can share those with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the warm welcome, Larissa. I'm currently in Naarm, Melbourne, on the land of the Wurundjeri and Bunurong people, who I'd like to acknowledge. I'd also like to acknowledge the many communities in the Northern Territory with whom I've worked over the years. And I'd really like to thank Auntie June for her strong words. And I'd like to thank the organisers of this important event for inviting me to speak. And what I want to do in the time I've got is just say a little bit about the policy history, the sad policy history of the Northern Territory intervention, and how that policy history has continued to the present and is continuing. On the 21st of June 2007, the Commonwealth Government, with opposition support, blatantly intervened very directly in Indigenous policy and population management in the Northern Territory, deploying its constitutional powers as well as its fiscal and military might. Using the pretext of universal dysfunction in remote communities, a national emergency was declared, and the government deployed its monopoly over the supposedly legal use of force and violence to erase the privilege of citizenship from remote living Aboriginal people living in 73 prescribed communities that had in the past been government settlements and missions in an earlier policy epoch. The intervention sought to revisit and amplify the earlier colonial attempts in the 1950s and 1960s by the Commonwealth to assimilate Indigenous peoples, some then still living at or even beyond the frontier, speaking Indigenous languages, largely beholden, as Auntie June said, to their own laws, their own customs, beliefs and values. government policy looked to reform tradition-influenced behaviours and make Aboriginal people compliant subjects, full proper Australian citizens. This assimilation project deployed brutality, the taking away of children, the deliberate destruction of distinct lifeways in the name of Western development. By 1972, this assimilation project had failed and was abandoned. One assumed dead and buried forever, as forms of self-determination, self-management and community control became the basis for a more benign and humane approach. Now, one can debate the so-called outcomes of this new self-determination approach that was more attuned to the global trend to decolonise subjected population. So the Australian government was doing what other settler colonies were doing internationally. But two things are certain. First, the Australian settler state and society has never given up on an overarching goal to assimilate, more politely couched perhaps as normalising or mainstreaming Indigenous people. At least in other decolonising places, assimilation is called for what it is. In the United States, they talk about absorption, and in Canada, they talk about cultural genocide. Second, self-determination was never properly resourced on any equitable needs basis. Despite the passage of racial discrimination law in 1975, the approach remained fundamentally racist. Aboriginal people in remote places were treated as denizens, as second-class citizens, with poor access to all services, be it health, housing, education, employment, community infrastructure. The Northern Territory intervention set out to eradicate the self-determination approach and unleash free market capitalism on these communities, to be expertly guided by schemes to behaviourally modify and punish Indigenous people by withdrawing rights, by deploying biopolitical technologies. Having failed once in the Northern Territory, the Commonwealth was back for another go, this time targeting not just individuals, but also targeting their communities, their kin networks, and their organisations, all judged as failures according to the ideological metrics of the powerful. And all these individuals were classified as deviant, irrespective of their behaviour or of their local status. This was to be a once and for all, do or die, big daddy state intervention to eliminate Aboriginal ways and replace them with Western Aussie ways. A year later, an approach was introduced to measure progress to sameness with unnegotiated, imposed, closing the gap statistical targets. And that was just a year after the intervention in 2008. 14 years on, one can sadly look back at this devastation and havoc wreaked by the Northern Territory intervention. What can be thought of as the contemporary morbidity of the intervention, the suffering caused by the intervention on those people that the intervention purported to assist, to heal, and to restore. People in the communities in the Northern Territory and elsewhere in remote Australia have experienced 14 years of discriminatory, racist exceptionalism, with state attempts to regulate all aspects of their lives, of those deemed unworthy, with the main triggers for such an assessment, that is, that they're unworthy, being whether they're unemployed, in places where only 3 in 10 adults have worked, and where they're assessed as conforming to Western ways in the upbringing of their offspring. A set of disciplinary measures have been put in place with the only route to liberation being conformity with settler colonial ways of being, with the only option available to resistors being exclusion, neglect, and punishment. Both sophisticated and crude forms of surveillance have been deployed in this biopolitical intervention. People's expenditures are controlled and managed. Access to welfare is increasingly subject to draconian and onerous mutual obligation requirements. School attendance is policed by yellow-shirted school attendance officers and truancy officers. Community stores are checked by licensing officers. Housing is checked by tenancy officers. Social workers seek out children deemed failing to thrive to be taken to risky foster care outside community. More and more police criminalize people for minor offences. These are hyper-regulated places supposedly opened up to the free market. In saying all this, I'm not saying there are no problems. There are massive issues, but mainly, I would argue, caused by poverty and disadvantage, not by indigeneity. What has this crude and cruel attempt at behavioural reprogramming achieved as individuals, communities, organisations experience the intensification of the old assimilationist approach? In some places, there is better infrastructure, houses, schools, shops, even swimming pools. And some of this is funded by mining money from mineral extraction on Aboriginal-owned lands. Kids are getting better dental services, and in many places, kids get school lunches. But all the statistics are telling us that this behavioural intervention to assimilate, develop, close the gaps is failing. Unemployment is higher than ever. School attendance is lower than ever. Poverty is higher than ever. More than 50% of Indigenous people in very remote Australia live under the poverty line. Overcrowding in public housing is everywhere. And most damning of all, more than 40% of households report running out of money for food. There is hunger. People are dying prematurely in rich Australia because of poverty. The intentional destruction of existing institutions has been a disaster for the about 50,000 people living in remote communities in the Northern Territory. And there is no accountability for this disaster created by the authors of this approach or their political masters. Both sides of mainstream politics are to blame for this abject failure, yet neither are apologising or seeking the radical change in direction back to self-determination that is needed. Instead, it is still all about opening up Aboriginal lands for mineral extraction, training Aboriginal people to be precarious labourers, using Aboriginal capital from the Aboriginal benefits account in the process of looking to develop the North. Now all this is dressed up as co-design, the new buzzword alongside workability, reform and development. One is reminded of Paul Keating's warning, beware the whispered word, workability. Workability for whom? Reform for whom? Development for whom? Co-design by whom? Some of this reeks of indirect rule, Canberra capture and deal making with you northern elites to get Canberra's imposed ways. Some reeks of selective amnesia and national speciality, overlooking the millions and millions wasted and the harm done in the name of improvement and empowerment. Some reeks of path dependency, lazy policy making, and a reorientation to new priorities like constitutional recognition and treaty making. Things can and must be better. Paradoxically, the COVID pandemic has provided a glimpse as Aboriginal organisations played the major role in ensuring no infections and no deaths in remote places. Quite a remarkable outcome over the last 15 months. We've seen COVID supplements of people's welfare, improving their lives, and we've seen less mutual obligation. And so people being at liberty to revive the old productive ways. And people have continued to demonstrate grounded resistance and persistence, insisting on their rights to live on and care for their country. To end on a positive note, because that is a pretty dismal story, surely we will not wait for another 14 years to 2035 before common sense, driven by political action and activism, prevails. We need to empower the local in all its diversity. We as a nation need to fund remote places equitably, fairly. We need to perhaps now think about adding compensation for the rorts, for the damage that's been wrought on people since 2007, if not before. We need to stop wasting dollars on dogged maintenance of the stronger future failures and move to support success that is evident, that has been driven by local initiative, effort, and local organisations where they remain more or less intact. 14 years on, enough is enough. I don't think we need to wait another year. It's time for change now. Thank you very much for listening.
Oh, wonderful, John. It was a bit depressing, but it was very truthful and speaks to the deep thinking you've done around this. We're very grateful to have had your time, but also your insights and your scholarship. And of course, your very heartfelt commitment to, as you say, communities you've spent a lifetime working with. Thank you so much. It's now my great pleasure to introduce Professor Eva Cox, who is one of those people you can say needs no introduction and you know it to be true. I'm sure she's known to many of you. Not only has she, of course, been a strong opponent of the intervention since its introduction, and with others like John, has been at the forefront of using her enormous policy experience to deconstruct what was wrong with the policies from the start. One area where Eva's been tireless in her advocacy and in her critique has, of course, been around the issues of the welfare reform, particularly the basics card and the cashless debit card. Eva, it's so great to see you, and thank you so much for taking some time. I'm going to hand over to you. Perhaps you can start by just letting us know whose country you're on and then sharing your insights with us. You're still on mute, Eva.
Eva, you're on mute.
Ask to unmute. I am unmuted. Hooray. Can you hear me? Right. All right. I mean, I'm going to come in here in a rather strange angle because I think that this is where we've been making mistakes for a very long time. Just to sort of say where I'm from, I'm in an area of the Gadigal people in the Eora Nation, and I do pay my respects to them, and partly because of the things I've seen done and the things I've seen happening, both here and widely. I want to do something quite different, and this is where I actually think that, I mean, John gave us a very good assumption of the whole collection of all of the things that have gone wrong. We really haven't talked about what has been changing and what we need to change. So I want to start with a statement saying Western civilization doesn't really exist. It thinks it exists. It carries on like a 2-bob watch every time it thinks somebody is challenging it. But if you take a look at what's happening in the world today, it is very hard to find a country which is being well run to the point that the people living there trust it. And I think we're into some really serious trouble broadly. So I think one of the things that we've got to do is dig into what is happening and the level of distrust. I did a whole lot of stuff in my Boyer lectures years ago talking about the necessity for trust and for the sort of goodwill as part of democracy. And one of the things that we really don't look at is the fact that Indigenous cultures are deeply based on trust. It is deeply based on beliefs. It is deeply based on responsibilities to the land, to other people, to the world in a very different way to the way that Western civilization, particularly with what it's doing about sort of competition and all of the market forces and the various other things, they've really screwed things up. There's very few countries you can now say are being run well. You have to only have a look at what's happening in Africa. You only have to have a look at what's just been happening in the USA. You only have to look at the way the countries like Hungary and Poland are fracturing and the various other things. Basically, we've stuffed it because of a lot of the things we've done. And a lot of the stuff that we've done to the Indigenous people, to the First Nations in Australia, is a very good illustration of what we do wrong. So we either try and do what John has just done, which is outline to the government and ask for them or try and push them to fix the things that they've done. But they can't see that they've done anything wrong because everything they've done fits into what they're doing in stuffing up the Australian community much more broadly. You know, we've got conspiracy theorists running, we've got various other things going. The whole concept of social democracy is down the drain. The market forces are based on the fact that human nature is self-interested dead shits that sort of look to do, you know, only for their own advantage. It's got nothing to do with collectivity. It's got nothing to do with community. It's got nothing to do with belonging to the land in the way that Indigenous people do, rather than the land belonging to us so that we can exploit it. Now, I know this is moving well outside what groups have been doing, but basically, and this is where I sort of go back to my own experiences, it is almost impossible to change things at the moment because we do not have anybody in Parliament that is interested in moving away from the discipline of economics, which is totally antithetical to everything that I think in its various formats, both Marxism and marketism, you know, to creating a decent society. The word society doesn't exist anymore. And the one thing we can say about what's happening in Indigenous community is a revival now of the social, the relational, and the importance thereof to try and make things work. And I've watched with serious interest some of the events that are happening when people are trying to get back to putting Indigenous ways of doing things back on the agenda rather than trying to do them within Western stuffed up means that we're doing it. I think we've got a very real challenge towards us doing this, because what we used to do, and I mean, I got into politics in the 1970s via the women's movement. I also have a background as a refugee from Hitler. So, I mean, I came in wanting to sort of work out what you can fix things for. So I became very interested in being a political activist. And we thought naively in those days that if we actually presented facts and figures and explained to people where they were going to do things wrong, they'd fix things. And for a while, we'll give it credit that it did start doing that. I mean, you have to have a look at things like the Black movement, Black Lives Matter, the women's movement, the civil rights movement, and the start of the Indigenous Aboriginal movement in the 1970s and into 60s, 70s, 80s. And we really felt we were getting somewhere for a while. There was a sense of optimism and a sense that society was actually on the agenda. And then these stupid, bloody neoliberals turned up with their anti-government, the whole idea of anything to do with public services and any sorts of things of society. We were all individuals, and that sort of really stuffed things up very badly. And we actually have been running in that, and thus we've been destroying society. We've been destroying community. They're words that don't exist anywhere on either the Liberal Party agenda, and surprisingly enough, barely even on the Labor Party agenda, which is totally focused on paid work. Paid work is something we invented with the Industrial Revolution, and it's actually been quite destructive in terms of the fact that it moves away from concepts like obligations and skills and things that are being done for community at large. So I suppose, and this is a very brief attempt to sort of try and work out how we do this, listening partly to what other people have been saying, we know what's wrong. And what is wrong is the lack of the social and the lack of the concept of interdependence, the lack of community, the lack of belonging to land, the lack of respect for land. All of those things have been undermined over the past 20, 30 odd years, and they're still being undermined because nobody really knows what to do. You have a look at all these international meetings, and we've got environmental issues, which are hugely important and somewhere where a lot of the First Nations have done a lot of work which would be extraordinarily useful to fix it. We need to put all of these things together, and we need to start actually looking at what we want, not what we don't want. This is the big error that we have tended to make over the years, which is pointing out the errors of people's ways and trying to get them to fix it using the odd bit of the UN or the various other things to try and look at the legal issues. It doesn't work. It hasn't worked really for the past 20 to 30 years. We've been gradually going down the gurgler in a whole lot of ways, and most European countries and most Asian countries are having serious problem with dictatorships and various other things. How do we actually get back to having a discussion about what we want? And I think this is where the NT stuff comes in very interestingly, because what was wanted there has not been met. I mean, John's stuff when he was doing the earlier stuff about the sort of, the working with people in the various communities and so on, that was part of the optimism of the earlier years, because we thought that things would work if we actually started introducing local control, local decision making, all of those other things, that all of those community tensions and relationships that are being destroyed by colonization and bureaucratization and marketization could be replaced slowly and by making small advances. And then we got screwed. Because somewhere along in the 80s and 90s, the market system took over. And by the time we got to the early part of the century, it was really in control. So, I mean, the attempt by government to do what they did do to the Indigenous community in the Northern Territory is a perfect setting for that. Get them jobs, get them, use the money stuff, get away from that, take control, make them behave like good white people. And then we would be able to sort of, assimilate them, because that was obviously the best way to go. I think there's some good opportunities for us to actually sit down and work out, what do we want? How would we run it? Now, that is beginning to happen in some of the stuff around Uluru. It's beginning to happen in some of the treaty making, although I agree that treaty making might spend an awful lot of time getting the words down on paper, but we really do need to change a lot of the attitudes to make sure that people conform with the treaties. That's going to be a really difficult thing. But there is much more work within Indigenous communities about how things need to be changed, how the language, the various other things bring up very different concepts about the way we relate to each other. Now, this is a big picture stuff. It's much easier to tell you to go off and do a survey. It's much easier to tell you to sort of collect some data. It's much easier to have a demonstration, which quite frankly, politicians pay no attention to whatsoever. It's much easier to actually sort of fill in your various petitions and your various other things, and and get quite angry and chuck a few bricks and do a few other things. But we really need to use a lot of the knowledge that the First Nation people have to try and create a better Australia, to try and put on the agenda how things should be run, not what's wrong with what's happening now, because they're not listening. They don't give a stuff. They just think we're wrong because we're trying to sort of undermine Western civilization as you knew it, as the Conservatives think. And we're undermining the idea that being in paid work is the ultimate thing as man. Sorry, Karl Marx, you got that one wrong. But I think we just need to get back to the idea that we all make contributions to society, and we can all make other things, other sets of relationships, that we are social beings, essentially. And Indigenous First Nation stuff shows that up very strongly. Very little that has come up in Western civilization in the last few hundred years does that. A lot of the emphasis that came out of the Romantics was very much on the individual. We need to get back to some of the basic ideas of what is community, which you have and we've lost. What is the relationship? And I just think we really need to pick up the fact that there's a lot of things happening, and a lot of things have come out. And I like the point that that John made about the pandemic, because it really did raise a lot of issues about collaboration and about trusting people and about sort of having public and local stuff working together in a way that could actually make things work with pandemics. I think we really do have to get together over the next few months and put up to government and put up to the people generally what we want, what's the outcomes, what is the society we need, not horror stories about what's gone wrong. People switch off immediately, but stories which says, this is the way we can create something that's going to work for the environment. This is something that will work for the community. This is something that will work in healthcare. This is something that will work in education, and start putting up proposals. Because the one thing that I've learned very thoroughly, having been advocating for this sort of stuff for a long time, is that they absolutely ignore everything we say. And I used to teach my students when I taught this stuff, the loose bricks theory of social change. And I suppose that's what I'm trying to say now. There's a million loose bricks in our societies at the moment. And if you want to knock down a brick wall, you find the loose bricks. And I think a lot of what Indigenous people could contribute, and the people that have learned from you and the people that are learning other things that relate to it, we could find some loose bricks and start building the idea of a society that's based on communalities, interdependence, relationships and fairness, and we'd have a hell of a lot to learn from Indigenous people. I know it's big, but think about it. Is that enough?
Thank you. What a rousing call to arms that was for anyone who thought they were just going to be, having a quiet Sunday night. You've got everybody now thinking about how they can contribute to these larger conversations.
There's a lot going on at the moment, and I just think we need to sort of put the Indigenous stuff in as the solution maker, rather than the problem.
Make the case very well. I just wondered as well, you mentioned your Boyer lectures, which I have to say I go back to from time to time, and they still stand the test of time, which might speak to how wonderful they were and continue to be, or it might speak to how little everything's changed, to maybe a bit of both. I was just wondering, you've also written quite a bit, but I thought, did you have any suggestions for where people could be reading more, or how? And you set out this challenge of everyone getting together and having conversations. Do you have a mechanism through which we can do that? Are you hoping
we're hoping at the moment? I've been trying with various people like Get Up and various other groups to try and get them to produce solutions, and they're not producing solutions. They're all very busy producing the problems. And then they say, well, it's up to them to produce the solutions, which is naive, because let's face it, the government's got rid of almost everybody that could write policies. and they get them all back from the big four, from PricewaterhouseCoopers and so on. So, you know, you can't tell the government to make up new policies, because even if they wanted to, they wouldn't get the right one. So you've got to give them the policies. We've got to draft the stuff. And we're trying to set up a network, and it's in very early stages. It's got no money and resources behind it, but it's something I've been trying for a while, and somebody's offered it, which we've called Elpis. And Elpis is the Greek name for hope. And the reason we picked Elpis, we might have been able to find something in the Indigenous thing, but Elpis was the female figure, nothing sexist about it, that came out of the Pandora's box and was actually the Greek word for hope. And what we're missing at the moment is hope. Because unless you have a sense of optimism, that you can actually do things and change things, people get embittered, nasty, and turn in on themselves and get involved in things. And what I think we need to do, and I would very much like to sort of see the Indigenous community do that, is build the hopes. And there's quite a lot of stuff happening. Publicise them, lock them together so that we can stop people banging on about the fucking economy, excuse that. I don't know who invented it, but they shouldn't have, because economics is actually an extraordinarily poor predictor of human behaviour, because almost all the things that count with Indigenous, you know, with First Nations and other things, people that are real people, are called externalities under economics, so they're excluded because they don't turn up in gross domestic product. So, I mean, there's a whole debate that we need to have about what is essential to human beings, and I think there's a lot of it going on. So we need to put together something, any suggestions, things that just links the stuff together so that we can find the communalities that we do have. And a lot of people, I think, have. And when I talk about this stuff, people get quite excited because that's what they'd like to see happening. And it's not in the institutional area. So let's go outside it and make our own. That's all I can say at this stage. I'm a good person with throwing out ideas, and it's somebody else that's going to have to organise the revolution.
Well, I think you've got enough to be able to rest on your laurels with all the work you've done over the years.
I'm still doing it, but I'm just not an organiser in that sense. But there's a lot of them out there. There's a lot of them on this line. Yeah. There's a lot of things we can do, John. You know, we can start producing the policies of action which are about creating what we want rather than what we don't want. And I think that that's what unfortunately the left has been doing, is telling crisis stories rather than solutions, and people give up.
Well, thank you. That's always wonderful to hear, and your tirelessness, Eva, is amazing. Thank you so much. It's now my great pleasure to introduce Kendall Trudgeon, who's the former secretary of the Yolŋu Nations Assembly, a former coordinator of East Arnhem Mediation and Restorative Justice Centre. Kendall was also Yingia's campaign manager at the 2016 NT election. And I think, given that we're looking for experience and practical solutions, it's a good time to hand over to you, Kendall. So welcome. Maybe you could start by telling us where you are, whose country you're on, and then share your presentation with us.
Yeah, thanks, Larissa. So my name's Kendall. I'm currently in Darwin, so on Larrakia land. Heads up to Auntie Jean Mills, but I'm from East Arnhem Land, so from the Arnhem Land side of things in the Northern Territory. I was born from that country around, I think we would say my spirit baby comes from Wulkabumiri area, and but I'm certainly not Indigenous. Non-Indigenous. My parents have been, and my family have been in East Arnhem Land for a couple of generations. So when June Mills was talking about, you know, some level of integration, I guess we aspire to that sort of thing. We'll never be integrated fully, but we can learn. And I hope to present some stuff of that learning with some ideas about policy from the Yolŋu and Arnhem Land perspective about what maybe Arnhem Land government needs to do. So in the introduction, Larissa mentioned some of my work. I'm a community development worker. That's my profession. I've also worked as a mediator and currently working on some land tenure issues around the Gove Peninsula, where there's a mine that's been there for some time, predating the Land Rights Act. I'm working on that issue as a sort of intermediary with some paralegal and ethnography sort of assistance to parties being Clan Baparo groups and Ringich groups from that area, Clan Alliance groups from that area. There's multiple parties. And it's been an ongoing contested situation for almost the entire time of the Aboriginal Land Rights Act. So we're attempting to do something about it and help sort it out in an inclusive way, not an exclusive way. And it's also about trying to get some practical recognition of the Medayan system of law. So in Arnhem Land, there is roughly a system of law that covers that region. And I want to introduce some of that so that we know, I guess, in a nutshell, what we're talking about. I don't think that people often think about, particularly non-Indigenous people, we're trained from birth to believe that our civilization is superior and that we bring good things, and that we need to bring those to other people around the world to, I don't know, teach them how to be human. But and we forget that there's other ways of being and other ways of organising and other ways of ensuring well-being. And certainly in Arnhem Land, we have an area of Australia where, as of now, there's still a system of law being practiced and maintained to a degree where it is right there in the daily living, you know what I mean? So colonisation started in Sydney and it's moved its way progressively, west, southwest, and then north, and then north, west, etc. In the last 100 years. So the intervention, to me, is an ongoing part of that colonial movement. And Northeast Arnhem Land is one of the last sort of frontiers of that movement, where you can feel and know and experience what happened in the south of this country today. So they just replaced shooting people with jailing people and other means of institutional control. So I guess that summarises my view of the intervention as well, because having I was living in the space during the intervention, and it was quite difficult to deal with. They changed a lot of things in a short matter of time. It disempowered everyone in the community. It became very difficult to do anything, sort of chopped the heads off any community action. And it's continued to go in that way. John has mentioned, and June mentioned the over-governance of the space. We have federal, we have Northern Territory, we have local government. These are all colonial superstructures on what is really there, the law of the land, the system of Yolŋu governance through aspects like the Ngada system of law, the Ngada Rom, through Baparo clans, through clan alliances, through eldership and all the individual authorities that make up, all this sort of governance. So if I don't know, is the screen showing any? Can we switch to the pictures? Yeah, sorry. So I hope I've been making sense at this juncture. So this is a picture of where East Arnhem Land is, and it was a reserve up until, I believe, the Land Rights Act happened, and that's the rough area of that reserve. Can we just go to the next one? That's the basic premise of Yolŋu law and governance. That's a publication of mine which tries to outline in a general way the Yolŋu system of law and roughly what is the system of law across Arnhem Land. So can we keep going through that quickly? There's a booklet there titled to the next slide, please. Number 3. So the next slide is about East Arnhem mediation. That's just a document title. That's one of my projects that I've worked with people in East Arnhem Land, and through that project, this is post-intervention as well. One of the responses from the community was to try and work out means of governance and policing and dispute resolution that circumvented the colonial superstructures. And we ran this project under mediation and restorative justice culture, but it utilised Yolŋu law because they're very much, what would you say, collaborative. The approaches are very similar, and so we could utilise those mediation restorative processes and empower Yolŋu law to make decisions about criminal activity, around negotiations of any kind, around dispute resolution. We could work with police to do that. We could work with government to do that. And we could work, most importantly, with Yolŋu frameworks of governance. So through the clan leadership, through clan alliance leadership, and through overarching elements like Ngāra Rom. Next slide, please. That's just the Yolŋu Nation Assembly. I worked with them when they established themselves in 2011. There was also a response to the intervention. You know, I've worked mostly in this frame where we're trying to pursue some level of practical sovereignty while, you know, there's things coming from external parties like the Australian government in the case of the intervention, like the Northern Territory government in the case of the intervention, who are trying to exert control over the space. This was the idea of Yolŋu Nations Assembly was to try and create an intermediary organisation that met sort of macro governance models, which certainly the Westminster model and colonial model is, with what is a Yolŋu model, which is a power dispersed model. It's a decentralised model, and so we were trying to establish a body that could be a gateway between the two, because for some reason, you know, the Westminster system does find it hard to see anything that's not like itself. So the body was trying to be established to enable that. And this is a letter stick that they used in terms of some of their initial activity or action to try and make awareness of themselves and their sovereignty. Next slide, please. So this picture is about Yolŋu and Bininj law and Arnhem Land law in the Northern Territory. We have 3 sections to the cycle. There's the land, this guy standing on the land and the sea. There's the people, and then there's all the paraphernalia of the law. The pictures represent, you can see the clapsticks there, that's representing the song lines. The animals there are representing the ancestral beings, which establish the organisations and the law, the code of law, the behavioural codes. The Dulma Mukabati, that bag there, is roughly sometimes translated as a title deed. It represents title to land. There's a man sitting in a tree that represents the Dalkaramir of the Ngāra Rom. They're a senior governing authority individual. And then in the next space is it's supposed to be a warao, which is a shade shelter, and that represents some of, to me, the you know, the councils that people sit in to make decisions, and that's the law in total between the land, the people, and the stuff of law. So these are all symbolic. The stuff of law is all symbolic, so it's a code it's a code of its own. They don't use obviously written pieces of paper. They have it written in symbols on those objects, and through the song lines, there's metaphor and analogy, and there's actions that are presented as being the right behaviours, and there is a code of behaviour. Do nots, things like that. Next slide. I have to do this quick because so these are just some pictures to show that these this system is in operation. This is a picture of Ngara Rom. The guy up the tree is a Daywurrwurr person. They're meeting to maintain their law and their governance. Next slide, please. I put this slide in to just ensure let people know that women are equally involved in the law as men. The law is roughly divided along lines of sex, but that gives the two sexes power within the system. And from those power bases, there's a meeting in between. And so all decisions include men and women and the authorities of men and women. So that I have to specifically have to say that because of some of the communication that came out of the intervention, which was directed at this so-called sexism of primitive people. That sort of conversation. Obviously, that's all colonial, sort of talk, and neither are the people of East Arnhem primitive nor sexist. Sexism came with militarization and attempted domination of other peoples. They haven't done those things. Next slide, please. This shows the Yiddish side of the Ngara Rom, and some of these people are deceased, so I should have said that earlier. But this shows the Yiddish side of that. Things are split into Daywurrwurr and Yiddish roughly as well, and so Ngara Rom covers both Daywurrwurr and Yiddish in different institutional frames. They're brought back together through the relationships of Yorti Indi, which you might have heard through the musical band. Yorti Indi. It's actually a governing term about how people work together and how clans work together and how they make decisions. Next slide, please. This just leads into that. I don't know how much time I've got, but you can let me know, Larissa.
Yeah, you've still got at least another 5 minutes.
Okay, so just roughly, this is another aspect that's really important. This is a kinship chart, and this is from I think John Rudder. I've used his material here. The red cross, the red lines outline the patrilineal, so descent through the father, and the kin relationships that come through that father line. And the other line there is the matrilineal line, the descent line through the mother. And this is very important because this makes up a lot of governance. And so if we go to the next slide, we can see what I've got here is a rough outline of a governing unit. So this represents one of those there's circles, there's 5 circles. There's one that says Watango, it's in the middle, and there's Waka Watango at top, Ngandi Watango, Mari Watango, Kuturu Watango to the sides. Now those 5 circles make up one unit. Tradition. Generally they're called a clan, but the thing is that has happened is that through the colonial system, they've concentrated on the patrilineal only. The patrilineal part of that clan or unit is just represented there in the center circle. The matrilineal surrounds it, and the matrilineal descent line and relation kin around it is essential to governance and decision making. So these are things that we are working on to try and get recognised in practical ways to make life easier for people and centre Yolŋu and Indigenous law in Arnhem Land in the systems we have. I could go on, but I don't want to. I'll just stop there because the way this works is that. So in terms of policy, my work and what I hope is what I would suggest with people, like in terms of policy suggestion, is actually I want to aim that at the governing unit of Arnhem Land, the people of Arnhem Land. For me, the policy agenda the response needs to be about recognition of law. So when we're balancing this conversation of like, do we want treaty or do we want something else? what we're all pretty much united about is like self-determination and sovereignty, and a mainstay in achieving those things is re-empowering the system of governance and the system of law, the rule of law of the land. And this is being undermined through all the aspects of the intervention in an ongoing way, and all the things that have been mentioned through Eva and John and June before them in practical ways. The other part that I would be highlighting is policy necessity is to move forward in self-policing, justice and dispute resolution. So this has been taken away in more than ever through the intervention. There's more police than ever in Arnhem Land. It was a big push, obviously, in that process. And they aren't bringing peace to the communities, they're bringing conflict and dispute. They're bringing a superstructure layer of things that make it hard for elders and the units of governance to respond to their own needs around policing and justice and dispute resolution. The other policy agenda, I think, that needs to be, you know, if I was an advisor, you know what I mean, to elders of Arnhem Land, is to say, and of course the people are looking at these things, is the economic circumstances and what's been taken away in an increasing way from the since the intervention is self-determined business and being able to make agreements from the ground with other people who want to partner in business or want to make things possible. So everyone needs to be able to make agreements that are honoured and that are binding to get on economically. And this is being reversed in Arnhem Land, not through any laws currently per se. Like there is some specific things from the intervention. They changed some of the Land Rights Act, which have but nothing. They haven't really taken away any of the base things won, so to say, through the Aboriginal Land Rights Act. But what has happened is the administrative function. The push from the federal government for, you know, developing the north has opened up an intent to do things more quickly, and as a result, it's getting sloppy, where decisions are being made that override who actual owners are of land and who is properly being consulted about land. And so with that comes a huge issue around land tenure. So those are the three policy areas like of response. And I think, like, I've offered, so in the community of Arnhem Land, like, there has obviously been some of those things. I've only offered the things that I've been involved with Yolŋu Nation Assembly, East Arnhem Mediation, and currently we're working on some stuff in Go with land tenure. But there's obviously other people doing other things. But that's what I want to present. Hope it makes sense. But I guess I'm trying to focus in on policy from the ground and how that might meet some of the policy, particularly people advocating from that colonial space to get some of that activity that's happening through the colonial world directed to proper avenues. It needs to be met from the ground, and people are obviously working on that, and that's the policy frames that I want to just table, you know what I mean?
Thank you so much, Kendall. What a great way to finish the day, to get such a great reminder of the Yolŋu's governance system. And it really nicely flows on from some of the things that Eva and John were talking about to really highlight the fact that within these knowledge systems are really great alternatives that for too long have been overlooked and treated by outsiders as inferior. It's a really powerful way to finish the day, and gives us so much to think about. So thank you for those wonderful insights and really great practical policy ideas at the end. There was a bit of clapping. You can't hear it on the Zoom, but I think there was a wonderful response to your presentation, and it was very uplifting to get those insights and to see what's happening on the ground. We've just got one final thing for you. I'm going to hand back to Auntie Kathy in a short minute to read a statement from Yingia, who was scheduled to speak earlier this morning, but unfortunately, due to business, wasn't able to do that. But we have a short statement that she'll ring, which will be our fittingly final piece of today. Just from my own personal perspective as I hand over, I'd just like to thank all of the people that we've had the privilege of speaking with today, and particularly would like to thank everyone who's come online. I do just want to give a little shout out to Nala Kunith Monks, another great advocate who's there, and she made some great contributions on the chat, but of course has also been a tireless advocate as well. And of course, Georgina and your Concerned Australians, I just don't know how we would have gotten organised without you. So to you and the Intervention Action Rollback Group, and of course Sticks, all of who have been there right from the start. It's wonderful to have shared today with you and to reflect on what's happened, but also what we should be looking to do going forward. So thank you, everyone. I'm going to hand back to Auntie Kathy now. Still on.
Need to unmute.
Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Can you hear me? You can. Okay, thank you. Oh, what a rich, complete day. There's so much to take from that. And I can't even think what to say as an action to take, except to raise awareness and really think through what we've heard and get onto our politicians, but it's so much deeper than that. But I don't want to talk too long because I've got this very strong statement from Yolŋu Elder, who worked with Ken, who is now the independent member for the seat of Mulka in the Northern Territory Parliament, and who, as was referred to earlier, due to ceremony and song related to a funeral in the community, was unable to speak tonight. And this is his statement. In 2007, the intervention brought an attack against Aboriginal people and culture. It was like a war with the army deployed. It was sudden and swift, and all community leaders and elders were disempowered and painted as dysfunctional abusers. The lack of acknowledgement of our leaders and our elders and the takeover of our communities has seen the biggest threat to our people and culture. Following the advent of the intervention, we felt the full force of oppression as the federal and the Northern Territory governments imposed a number of new strategies, including, and these are listed, blanket welfare quarantining, the demand for leases of our land in exchange for housing, pushing us off our homelands by moving all services and housing to towns, the demise of local village council authorities, forcing our children into English-only schools, the rejection of Aboriginal customary law in court sentencing, increased removal of our children, increased sending of our young adults into juvenile jails, the slander of our culture and the assumption that Ballender culture was superior. Our elders and our leaders have been disempowered and stripped of their rightful authority. We want our authority returned to our leaders and our elders. We want our culture, our law, the rightful law of our land recognized and upheld. We Yolŋu are not lawless. Yolŋu possess law and authority, and with this law and authority, we will engage in treaty. Makarrata is the Yolŋu way to solve conflict between nations and clans. It does not matter if one nation is small and one is big, it is about justice. Through Makarrata, an agreement can be mediated that rights the wrongs and creates the path for genuine treaty. Treaties must come from the country, the law, and the people of the land. We do not want a treaty that is imposed on us. We want treaties that acknowledge our sovereignty and recognize our law. This is our Daywurrwurr Gupapuyŋu translation, our path to freedom. I want to thank everyone who continues to fight against the intervention, who continue to stand with us and fight for our future, the future for our people and our culture. Our spirits are with you, and we know your spirits are with us as we dance and sing the songlines at the funeral of my elder over this weekend, continuing our law and our culture on country. What a powerful statement. Thank you, everyone who participated. What a powerful day, but there's more. Tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Eastern time, so Central Australia would be 6:30, and over in WA, 2 hours before 7, 5 p.m. There'll be yet another forum, a plenary, and the title for that session is called The Way Forward. So we can see that many people have stayed for the whole session, and I know you won't want to miss the next session. And if you have a chance to let anyone else know, please let them know. And good evening to everyone. And may we all stand in solidarity. Thank you.